Welcome back to the fourth episode of the Zorki 3 CLA series. I have finally finished replacing and tuning the shutter. Since the last episode, I also redone the second curtain. If I remember correctly, that was the one, or was it the first curtain? I don't really remember. The one that had the little dimple. I think it was the first actually. So I couldn't just leave it like that. I took it out, cut the stitches, unglue it, reglue it, redo the stitches. So right now, no more dimple. Actually, it wasn't a dimple, it was like a sagging area. Okay. One more thing that I did was to actually reposition the ribbons of the first curtain. So I took them back very slightly, maybe less than half a millimeter, maybe, I don't know, 0.2 or something like that, but that was enough to actually close the gap quite significantly. So right now the gap between the curtains when the shutter is set to 1/1000th is very small. It's probably smaller than 1 millimeter, certainly smaller than it usually is in these cameras. But that allowed me to actually adjust the shutter tension to very low power, strength, number of turns, whatever you want to call it. So right now, as I previously said and probably mentioned in older series, I usually start with 3 full turns for the first curtain and 2 full turns for the second curtain. I read somewhere online some time ago, like a year ago or something, that was the initial tension for the Leica shutters when they were assembled, Leica 3 cameras, and it kind of stuck with me. So I always start with these values and adjust accordingly. Usually I need to adjust by increasing the tension. In this case, I had to adjust by decreasing the tension, and a lot. So from the initial 3 turns that I had on the first curtain, I'm now down to pretty much 1.5, maybe 1.75, something like that. And from the initial 2 turns for the second curtain, I'm now down to pretty much 1. So it's running with very little tension. Now on one hand, that means that the curtain travel speed or curtain travel time, depending on how you look at it, is certainly lower or faster. So the speed is slower, the time is longer than it might usually be in these kind of cameras. And because of this physical aspect, obviously the gap between the curtains needs to be smaller. Now I started the other way around, so I adjusted the gap first. It wasn't really an intentional thing. I had a bit of a unevenness between the 2 curtains, and I decided to even it out by pulling actually this is the second and this is the first, so by pulling the first towards the second and not pushing it out. So when the 2 curtains are like this, you can either pull this end towards the other curtain and get them squared, or you can sort of push this end like this to get them straight. Obviously, in one case you are narrowing the gap, in the other case you are enlarging the gap. Now, since I narrowed the gap, I needed to lower the tension. And as a consequence, everything is smoother, because obviously less tension means less strain on the winding knob, um, less less slap of the curtains, so everything is nicer. This is 50, I think, and this is 25, so 25th of a second. It's slower than usual, but the result is correct. This is 50th. This is 100th of a second, and this is 500th of a second. I won't select 1000th because you're not going to see anything. When I initially saw the strip of light, the diagonal strip of light on my monitor being so narrow, I kind of panicked. And my first thought was, okay, I'm taking it all apart again and I'm repositioning the ribbons. But then I kept shooting 1/1000th while looking at the source of light. So initially my lighting source here, and this morning I used looking through the window, and it never kept, so I always saw the entire image. And then I thought, okay, let me use my shutter tester, my electronic shutter tester, just to see what's what. I'll be honest and admit that I'm not using it. I'm not using it. I rarely use it because it's a DIY tester. I'm not really convinced of the results, although I get it. It's math, so math doesn't lie. But the results are something is weird. So for instance, as I said in my previous series, I think on either my Zorki 4 or Zorki 6 series, I use 3 methods of testing the shutter. So one method is the visual one. I use my CRT monitor and it tells me a lot about what's going on. So whether one curtain is moving faster than the other, whether the shutter is capping, whether there is a lack of squareness between the two curtains, and so on. It won't tell me, obviously, the shutter speed. That I need to evaluate with my brain, not necessarily with my eyes, because you will see a slit, okay, of various thicknesses or widths, better said. But it's not just about the slit width, it's about the slit width combined or in the context of the shutter speed. I mean the speed at which the shutter curtains are moving. So it's a bit more tricky than that, than just looking at the monitor. Okay, so this is criteria number 1, or method number 1. Method number 2 would be the electronic shutter tester. Method number 3 would be slow-mo. So shooting the shutter with my phone on the slow-mo option, and that will show me in slow motion the way the curtains travel. And usually if there is a discrepancy between the two curtains, you will see that one moves faster than the other. Obviously this is very visible at the faster speeds, not necessarily the fastest speed. When the gap between the curtains is so small, most of the times it won't even record the motion. But let's say 250. 250 is a good time. You have a decent gap between the curtains and you can see them clearly traveling from one end of the other, and you can see if one curtain moves faster than the other. Now that is also math behind the actual video. So it won't lie. If one curtain moves visibly faster than the other, you will see it. It can't be the other way around. Now, in this case, and in other instances, but in this case, because it's fresh, I shot a slow-mo video of the shutter. Let me see if I can maybe show you like a picture in picture. Okay, so this is, I think, 2/50th of a second. Okay, so that's the shutter. Well, if this would actually focus. Okay, yeah, you get the idea. So this is the shutter. Okay, so hopefully you saw that. In the video, you see that in the beginning, the first curtain moves a bit faster, or better said, accelerates a bit faster than the second one. And then the second one gets up to speed, matches the speed of the first, and then they both travel roughly with the same speed. Maybe the first one is slightly faster, meaning it's accelerating slightly faster than the second one. Now that's when you first look at a video like this, you say, okay, that's a problem, because they should always move with the same speed. But, and this is where the Zorki 4 has a feature that I initially thought it was a bug, but it's not a bug, it's a feature, where, okay, side note, because it's quite important. In the Zorki 4, and this is not happening in the Zorki 3, or is it? No, it's not. So, in the Zorki 3, if I pull back the second curtain, come on, sometimes it gets the first one as well, but if I pull back the second curtain by rotating the drum, or is it? If it is, it's very subtle. I'm looking at the gap. Is the width of the gap increasing or staying steady? I'd say it's increasing as it goes that way, slightly. In the Zorki 4, it's kind of more obvious. But anyhow, so the conclusion is, if now I'm holding my finger on the drum, so I'm locking the shutter in this position, and then I'm putting my fingernail on the first curtain, and I'm dragging the first curtain, it will have the tendency to pull on the second curtain as well. On the Zorki 4, it's even more obvious, because the design of this pole is made in such a way that the first curtain actually drags the second curtain along. So in essence, a Zorki 4 will theoretically work on the shutter speeds above flash sync. So for the shutter speeds where there is only a gap between the curtains, not the full length of the film gate. So for those shutter speeds, if the second curtain has zero tension, the first curtain will drag the second curtain along, and you will still get an exposure, a theoretically correct exposure. And that is quite nice, because you can actually use very little tension on the second curtain and the camera will still work. So as long as it does B correctly, I mean the second curtain closes correctly, the film gate on B, then you are pretty much fine. Now this gap that increases is not a bug, it's a feature, it's correct, because the curtains, they start from 0, so zero speed, and they will reach maximum speed or velocity when they reach the other side of the film gate. Now, like any object, if it starts at 0 and ends at x being maximum velocity, it means that between this point and this point there must be an acceleration. It's either a constant acceleration, or maybe it's an initial acceleration then followed by a constant motion. Now, if they accelerate, that means that the speed at which the curtains are traveling is smaller here than it is here. So they are slower, not smaller. So they are moving faster while reaching the other end of the film gate than when they entered the film gate. Now, if they move faster and faster and faster, but the gap between the curtains remains constant, that obviously means that the exposure will get smaller and smaller and smaller. So you will get an underexposure as the curtains travel towards this side. In order to compensate for that, they made this system that the system that locks the two curtains together. So in the Zorki 4 at least, the two curtains are mechanically locked. So once the gap has been established by this, they will be locked. The first curtain will drag the second curtain along, and the gap gets larger and larger because there's a difference in diameter between the drum and the rollers. So the rollers being larger, they will feed more ribbon, and that means that the curtain moves faster. And by doing that, the gap increases, and a bigger gap for a higher speed means the same exposure. So pretty clever, and as far as I know, it was actually a sort of innovation that the Soviets, or an upgrade that the Soviets came up with for this design. Because if you open and look at the Leica camera, Leica 3, you'll see that the diameters are equal. These are almost equal. So very little difference in diameter here. That's why the effect is not as visible as it is on the Zorki 4. Okay. I digressed a lot. Okay, so slow-mo. That's where I left the discussion. So slow-mo is the third way of checking the shutter, obviously, except checking with film. Now, if the slow-mo clearly tells me that the gap increases, so basically the first curtain moves faster than the second curtain, and then I test the camera on my electronic shutter tester, which tells me that the second curtain travels twice as fast than the first curtain, well, I have a problem. Because I cannot believe the electronic tester, although maybe I should, but I don't think I should, because that's pure math, while this is a purely visual representation of the shutter. And yet I tend to believe my visual representation, so I tend to believe my eyes more than I believe my shutter tester. Obviously, next thing would be to actually buy a real shutter tester, something that was specifically made for this. Okay, so that's what I've been doing since my last video. And to close this first part of this video, I am very pleased with the way the camera feels. It's super smooth, it's quiet for a camera without a body shell. When it will have the body shell, it will have the light shields, all the baffles, everything put together, and the lens. I reckon it will be very quiet. and I will test it against my Nika, which is super nice, and maybe against a real Leica. We'll see. Okay, and yeah, I also retapped this hole and got a new screw. This is actually a lens mount screw, so it's the same screw used for the lens mount from one of my donor cameras. I did shorten it a bit because it was obviously too long, and it is super okay. What I could also do, and I thought about it, is making some eccentric holes in this. So practically I would need to lengthen the holes towards this edge of this spring, so I could move the spring that way. Because if I manage to move it 1 millimeter, then I could engage this. But right now, I don't think it's needed, because it's very nice and smooth, and there is no slap like it was when I first opened the camera. Okay, so this is first part of this video. In the next part I will talk about the rangefinder assembly, just a couple of ideas or a couple of things that I would like to mention, nothing serious. Something about this, and I don't know if you see, this is Teflon, and I'll explain why. I also explained on my Zorki 4 series, but it's okay, I'll talk about it again. Also the means of returning the rangefinder arm to its original position, and basically the differences between the rangefinder of the Zorki 3 and the rangefinder from the Zorki 4. Oh, and I did another test. It was kind of on the knees, as we say it, meaning that I used my Fuji X100 to actually test the accuracy of the Zorki shutter. So I basically took one shot through the window with the shutter speed set to 1/1000. Okay, and I picked an ISO for which the exposure was correct for 1/1000 and f2.8, and then without changing the ISO or the aperture, I set the camera to B, set this one to 1/1000, and got them something like this. Actually it was like this. Pressed the button, press the button, release the button. Okay, so I got this. So this is the actual picture taken with this camera. You can see the info, and this is the picture taken through the Zorki. Now obviously this one looks weird around the edges because, well, that's not how you do it, but it was good enough. But the overall exposure seems correct. Obviously I could work out a way of doing it the right way, but I am too lazy for that. Okay, before actually not before I'm going to talk about the differences before what I was trying to say. So this is the rangefinder from the Zorki 4. You have the prism, you have this little cover with a little lens, obviously the diopter adjuster, and the rangefinder arm that is bolted to the entire assembly. And the rangefinder arm, which is this piece, pushes forward this arm that is connected to this prism. Actually, no, yeah, it's a prism that will reflect at 90 degrees, And in front of this prism you have another very shallow prism, Jesus, what's wrong with me, that's pretty much like a lens, and this one, if you rotate it left and right, you can shift the image up and down. So this is the vertical rangefinder adjustment, and this little screw is the horizontal, because screwing it in or on or out, unscrewing it out, moves the arm relative to this pivoting point, or this eccentric of the arm. Now this arm always wants to go back because it's spring loaded, and this is the spring, it's a big ass spring. Okay, so you will always have this positive feel to the rangefinder arm. On the other hand, on the Zorki 3, you have the same general arrangement, so prism, the diopter adjuster which sits here, the cover that sits here, but at the moment it's taken off, and then that prism that reflects at 90 degrees, this prism that adjusts the vertical, and a screw here that's similar to this one that adjusts the horizontal. The main difference is that this arm only has a tiny spring here across the screw, so it's like a coilover in a car, while this one has a big spring here. Now on YouTube I got a comment that they are actually interchangeable, with the mention that you lose one mounting point. So this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 mounting points. This one has 1, 2, which look pretty similar, and 3, 4. These two are different than these two, so these two won't match on those two holes, or vice versa. So you could probably replace them and only keep these two holes, probably. But the other problem is that this one is bolted to the entire assembly, but has a very similar shape. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So the idea is that you would need to bolt the rangefinder arm to this part, and then get the other part, so the entire assembly, on top. Yeah, probably. Initially I didn't see how you could fit this. Something felt off, but yeah, I think it's doable, and you'd only get those two mounting points, but it should be enough. Or you could actually drill the third hole, or one of the two other holes. So you could either drill this one, which is somewhere around here, drill and tap, or since this one is very close to the actual shutter, you could drill this one that's somewhere around here. So you would lose this hole that would be covered by the rangefinder of the Zorki 4, but you'd get another one here, tap it, and then you can swap the rangefinder assembly from one camera to the other. Alright, now one more thing before I start cleaning this and put it back together. This little lens or prism is kept in place by shellac. Shellac is a resin diluted in alcohol. This is alcohol, and because the shellac is very hard and brittle once it's dry. You can't really twist this little lens to make the adjustments. Now, what I usually do to circumvent this issue, take a cotton bud, dip it in alcohol, soak the entire rim of the little lens, and then use a fine screwdriver to pry the lens out. Now, I don't know if this is the best way of doing it, but it certainly works for me. I will take it out. I will and another thing, by doing this I have access to that prism inside, so I can clean it. And that little prism has a crack, actually not a crack but a missing part on top of it. It shouldn't matter much. Obviously you can replace it, so you can swap it with the prism from like the Zorki 4, but that is not as easy as it looks, and I would rather not go through all the trouble, because obviously this one seems pretty fine to me. I see the rangefinder patch very clearly and there's no trace of like part of the image missing. Alright, so now I can clean that side of the prism which has lots of marks on it. I could clean that side from here, and I can also clean the inside of this lens. Now once it's all cleaned and all the marks, the old remains of the shellac are gone, I will put it back. Obviously it won't sit in, I mean it will sit in place, but it can easily be nudged with the rangefinder assembly on the camera and the lens mount back on the camera and a lens attached. I will adjust the rangefinder. So that's pretty much one of the last adjustments that I will do. And when everything is spot on, double check, triple check, how many times checked you need it. So that didn't sound right. So check it as much as possible, as many times as possible, or as many times as you feel comfortable with, to make sure it's spot on, because then you'll get the top cover on, and to readjust it you'll need to take the top cover off. So it's not just like twisting a screw. Alright, so when everything is fine, I will use a bit of nail polish, only two little dots, 1, 2, and that is more than enough to keep it in place. Obviously I could use shellac, and I actually intend to buy some shellac because it's cheap, it lasts forever. So it's like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, $10 for 100 grams that you dilute with alcohol, and you'll get a solution that can glue like 1,000,000 of these, or maybe 100 or 200 leatherettes on the camera, something, a lot anyway. Alright, so that's about it with the rangefinders, not much to them. And one more thing and I will end today's video. This was initially loose, so this is the rewind knob. The rewind knob sits inside this tube. The tube has a cross, so it has 2 cuts in it. When it's loose, you need to use a set of pliers to push these 2 halves closer together. So you push them together, and now it is snug. So as easy as that. Okay, thank you. I will see you next time.